Welcome back to the channel. I'm Crypto Trend Trader, and today we're going to be taking another look at the Wyckoff Reaccumulation pattern. But before we get started, I'd like to remind you this is not financial advice. I'm not your financial advisor. These markets are extremely volatile, so please trade at your own risk. Alright, so we had put this model out here a little while ago, and basically we're taking a look at the progression of the symmetrical or a descending triangle. But we had basically decided this was going to be our Wyckoff accumulation and see how that played out. The market's been very strong, and we've been going through a long accumulation phase, and it's given us all kinds of signs that we are going to be in fact moving up to higher prices. But we came up here initially, we hit our preliminary supply zone, and then we went on our parabolic run. The buying climax come in at the end. We basically went full on, parabolic compared to the rest of the trend, was just more of a steady slope. Once we did put in that buying climax, it sells off violently. A lot of times they'll get oversold, we'll get a little bounce, and then the selling will continue. We'll finally come down and we'll put in our initial support line. When that bounces here, we're going to get essentially like an oversold situation where the market's just going to have an automatic reaction rally. It's going to come up. We're going to retest the highs. That secondary test sometimes will come higher, but sometimes it will not. If it fails to come higher, that's going to now give us our second line for the resistance zone that we're going to interact with throughout the pattern. And that's essentially the top portion of the trading zone that we're going to be taking a look at. And now you'll see we've initially created this downsloping resistance line as well. So once we come down here, we make it a little bit past the old support line, the first one we put in, showing a sign of weakness, and then we get a lesser bounce, a third smaller bounce. So when it comes back down, that's going to show the market essentially that it's weak, and what we get off that is actually the opposite. From our support zone down here, it gets reaccumulated off that wick, and we essentially put in a higher candle close. So now we form out this symmetrical triangle that we've been bouncing around in since then. We came up again, showed a nice sign of strength. We got a very strong rally off that. When we did hit our resistance zone, we busted through it, which is essentially like a spring to the upside. We came up through this, faking the market out that we were going to higher prices. It sold off. We attempted again. We couldn't do it. And then we started to form now this resistance line inside of the triangle. So when it sold off violently and came down again, it made the market think this was going to break. But in fact, we did put in another higher low. And we didn't even come down to the bottom line here of the support zone, bounced again. And now what we're forming on a Wyckoff reaccumulation model is what they refer to as the creek. And what the creek is, and we had initially said this but we weren't sure yet, typically the creek is going to be a lower high, a high, and then a low, and then a lower high, and then it would normally be a lower low. But at the time we had done this, we hadn't gotten this down yet. So when we put in this part right here, what that essentially did is it faked out the market. The market was initially thinking we were in this symmetrical triangle. Alright? When we broke down from the symmetrical triangle, people put in a bunch of shorts thinking we're going to break down. Then when this bottom forms a triple bottom right here off of these 3 points, we then get strength coming back up out of here, and now we've broken out of this initial pattern into a second pattern, which is the descending triangle. And now what we did is we sprung, basically we got the spring, we got a fake breakout out of this pattern and brought us straight back into the pattern that we were initially in. We're back in the symmetrical triangle. So what we're expecting right now is if we can get the strength here and we can burst out of this smaller pattern, which it looks like there's accumulation going on right now with the sell wall, if we can burst out of this pattern right here, we'll zoom in a little bit, but we'll get the measured move here and we'll essentially start jumping over the creek. Now because we got this fake out here, people are going to be hesitant to buy when we get over that resistance line. But once you get to this line here, the blue line, you can't deny it. That's an all new breakout of this pattern, in which case we'll get that measured move to the upside, taking us to about 14.5, putting in a higher high than this pattern, and we'll see the rest of the Wyckoff accumulation, the breakup through the resistance zone, and we'll have our last point of supply in here in this area. Once essentially the market comes up, we retest that top and we're looking strong, we've broken out of this pattern, we'll hit the LPSY, last point of supply. And when we do, that's the last chance to buy in before the pattern breaks. Come up, retest, come up. When we do break, we'll most likely get a retest, but at that point in time, the second we break to new highs, I think we'll get a quick sell-off, but then we'll be flying because people will realize this was reaccumulation taking place the entire time. So now we're just going to take a quick look here and zoom in a little bit. I had it on the 4-hour, but basically what we have going on here is a very small pattern. We had broke up from the spring here and come back in, and now we're trapped inside this triangle. We came down and started forming the bottom of this triangle as well, and essentially we only right now have the initial point, 1 point, a second point on the bottom, a second point on the top, and now what we're looking for is a third point down here where we could basically, we broke out of this triangle up, but it immediately sold back off and is retesting this now as support. But also inside of that is this triangle that was formed, and essentially what that is, that's accumulation with a buy wall. So what's happening is the price gets up, it gets stopped because someone wants to buy more at a lower price. It gets stopped by this resistance line that we've been fighting with, so it sells off, it gets bought back up here, and then immediately shoots back up, shows even more strength, comes to a new high, gets sold back off to that sell wall, and then it's going to come back down here, and we're going to put in again, even if we don't get the touch immediately, we're going to put in another higher low. And when we do, we come back up here and we're going to look at the close again, and I suspect that we will again close here at the top and bounce around maybe one more time before we do get the breakout. And when we get the breakout of this pattern, it's essentially going to complete the breakout from over here, which we were expecting all the way from the bottom. So we've already hit the first, second, and now we're looking to hit our third target. So when we hit the third target, that's going to take us to that final zone. So now if we want to sell off right here, we can. That's fine if this sells off and comes back down and continues completing the pattern, and it will stay valid as long as it stays anywhere within these triangles, because essentially what we could be doing, we could still just be filling out the same triangle, and we never invalidated anything. And that's the triangle we've been looking at the whole time, even when everyone else was looking at this symmetrical triangle. But this pattern is also coming close to completion. We're quite a bit of the way through the pattern. We've done quite a bit of moving around. It's been very volatile even inside this range. It's becoming less volatile, and we can expect sometime in the near future we will break this pattern. It does not often go to the end. It typically sells off or buys up, or breaks through right around this area. So if we do in fact get this push right here, it is possible once we break out of here and get confirmed closes above this, and we get that measured move off of this triangle, that's going to take us to the top of the range, and that may be the final push we need to get that burst, jump over the creek, and break up to new prices. So that is Bitcoin on the 4-hour, and that's our Wyckoff reaccumulation. And I hope I broke it down for everyone in a way that it was very comprehensible. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I do appreciate you checking out our video. We do put out new content daily, and we can see how this all plays out. I just want to talk real quick before I let you guys go about the trade setup that we had basically put here. We're essentially right at the entry point for it, and what we had done, we put it at a 4% stop loss, so if we did in fact break back down out of this triangle, it would take us out of our position. But you can see the risk reward is absolutely phenomenal on this trade. It's a 4% stop loss. It's a 31% gain if we go just to the top support line here. But again, we'd take some profits along the way, of course. But that's over a 7.77 risk to reward ratio. So it's like an 8x risk to reward. So we're basically going to risk 4% that we're wrong, and the price is in fact going to continue back down after this, and if we're correct, we're going to get 31%, but we are going to take some profits along the way at the sign of strength area here, and then of course at the first resistance, and then you know, at the very top, at least for an initial sell-off, and then we'll see how price reacts. It is still possible that we break out to the top, get a spring, and then sell off violently to the bottom, and in fact go to back down and test some of our lows around like the $6,000, $7,000 range. That is always a possibility. You have to be very careful with Wyckoff accumulation and distribution that you don't get tricked, and it's very important to take your profits along the way, especially in a situation like this where there is so much to gain and very little to lose. So that's it, guys. Wyckoff reaccumulation. I'm Crypto Trend Trader. Thanks a lot for checking us out, and we'll see you tomorrow.